How's it going, everyone? My name is Devin from Debo's Fishing, and today we're going over 5 spinnerbait tips for bank fishing. Now, back when I was a young lad, spinnerbait fishing for me became one of the first confidence lures or techniques that I got because, my man was great at fishing a worm, Carolina rig, that kind of thing. And he was like, you have to work it like this and do these things. Half the time, I didn't know what the heck he was doing. So a spinnerbait, just kind of out of necessity, was something that I always kind of went to. And over time, I learned, okay, if you start throwing it around standing timber, comes through there pretty good, and I seem to get more bites. And then along grass edges, and what colors seem to work for me. And it starts to all kind of click. The more time you put in with the lure and fish it in, more situations, places, times a day, the more you learn about a lure and how it works. So to help you out along the way for you bank anglers out there, the first tip is choose a spinnerbait that works for you. There's a number of different spinnerbaits on the market. This is the War Eagle, the little finesse size, and you can see this is not a very big profile for a spinnerbait. Pretty small overall. It's got that smaller kind of turtleback looking shell to it. Good compact spinnerbait for smaller ponds, small lakes, or if you just have small forage. This is the Screaming Eagle from War Eagle. Again, you can see still a pretty small size. This one's kind of unique because the weight is actually centered on the head and then right behind that back here in this big lead piece. But you can see the hook is no bigger than my thumb. Again, small overall profile. So you can see here, both of these are half-ounce spinnerbaits. The War Eagle there, much smaller hook, more compact. Over here on the left, this is the new Berkeley spinnerbait. You can see longer hook. It's got the soft plastic keeper there for you. Just an overall different look and a little bit bigger profile. The Booyah Covert spinnerbait, again, kind of middle of the road spinnerbait. And this is usually what I go to, something like this. 3/8 or a half ounce, really depends on you for the bank. If you're fishing real shallow, 3-4 foot or less, I go to that 3/8. Once I start to get a little bit longer casts, or I'm trying to get it down just a little bit deeper, I'll go to a half ounce like this. But you can get some that have like a real light wire on them. You can get some that have a bigger blade and all sorts of combinations in between. But I would say pick a spinnerbait that works well for you. And what I mean is, if you fish kind of decent cover, getting a decent sized hook that's not super small like the Covert here, good heavy wire hook on it, because if you get them caught in something from the bank, you can't just drive over like you're in a boat, You got to get them through that stuff. Or other things to look for is, does it have a soft plastic keeper? You can see this one has one there if you want to put a soft plastic on it. Blade size. Now, I don't get crazy about this. I don't change them out. I usually just buy one that I like and go with it, but there's some people that'll put bigger, smaller blades on. I really don't get into a ton of that. Even with the blade sizes, now I know that, that's going to kind of go into tip number 2 for me. If I were to recommend you one, what would I recommend for a bank angler? I'll be honest, I keep it to 3 really simple colors. I'll choose like a white or like a white and silver if I'm trying to chase shad or in a lake that even kind of dirtier stained lakes, white really stands out for me. So that's kind of the first. If it has a little green tinge to it, or you want to just add a little bit of bright to it, you're in a lake where chartreuse seems to do well, I'll go with like a white and chartreuse. And the third color would be a bluegill spinnerbait. Now this for me is one always right after spawn. When the bass are getting done spawning, the bluegill are moving up to spawn, bass will absolutely crush bluegill at that time. So that's one that I always have on a bluegill spinnerbait at that time specifically. I don't really throw it too much outside of that time. You certainly can, but I'm usually throwing one of those two. And when it comes to blades, you'll notice I actually like the ones where they give you a mix, a silver and a gold. So generally the way of thinking is, in cleaner, clearer water, I'm going to go with an overall smaller profile like this, a little bit more compact spinnerbait, smaller blades on it, and I'm usually going silver. Okay, so if you're trying to mimic bait fish or just get a good flash, cleaner, clearer water, more translucent skirt color, silver blades, the smaller willows because they put off the least vibration. As the water gets dirtier, I'll move up to just slightly larger blades. So you can see this just has a little silver Colorado flash with that willow in back. And this is kind of my overall favorite. A silver Colorado, a gold willow back here, or like a small silver Colorado. That way I've got each color. Now you'll talk to some people that'll say, in dirtier water, gold is a complete, different moneymaker. And I do like to have 2 gold blades on my bluegill type, but otherwise, I just kind of mix and match them. The only other time I'll change is going to a blade that has like a big, large Colorado. Do I have one? Oh, I did find one, and there's your bluegill style, something like that. But this is for really dirty water, or at night, is going to a larger Colorado blade like that puts off a lot of thump, a lot of vibration. So really dirty, muddy water, I'll go to that larger Colorado blade for just a real big, slow boom, 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 thump and vibration. Okay, tip number 3, a question that I get asked probably the most is, on a spinnerbait, do you go with a trailer plastic, a trailer hook, or nothing at all. And here's how I really break it down. When I'm in really thick wood, brush, when I'm really trying to weave it through that stuff and there's a chance that I could catch a fish and get it into there, I don't put any sort of trailer on at all. I fish it naked, this is what I call it. And I like the spinnerbaits like this that have two different skirt lengths, because when you pulse this and pop this, it'll look like a trailer on there. Once you get it in the water, it'll do this motion when you're reeling it, kind of give it pops, and we'll talk about that more. That's another tip, but giving it pops, it looks like a trailer on there. So if I'm worried about getting hung up, I don't want any plastic back here, any trailer hooks to get into that. I'm really worried about knocking into wood coming through it. Okay, the second part of that, when would I use a trailer hook like this? Well, a trailer hook for me is anytime usually I can get away with it, I'll put a trailer hook on. Now, as a bank angler, this can always be risky because it's one more hook to get caught up, but if I'm around larger wood, you know, or just kind of stumps that I'm bringing by, stuff that's not real brushy, real fingery, things that I can usually just kind of hit and come over, even with a trailer hook, usually a spinnerbait will come through that fine. Now, anytime I can get away with it, I can't tell you how many times I went fishing, had short strikes, ended up putting a spinnerbait trailer, a trailer hook on, and increase that catch percentage. Again, it's just one more hook back there to catch them. Pike, for example, will come up and swipe at it. Now, maybe you don't want to be catching pike, but I like it. You know, with a trailer hook, they come up and swipe at it and grab it. Anytime you feel like you're getting those bites and just missing it, I go to a trailer hook. Okay, the last piece is, when do I add a plastic trailer? So something like this, number one, this is a Terminator spinnerbait, and again, this has painted blades. I didn't even talk about painted blades. I don't get into them a ton, but in that real dirty, muddy water, instead of giving just a flash, they give flash and then a solid color. So stands up better. Again, it's personal preference. But when I want to add a plastic to it, first off, I have to make sure that the spinnerbait that I'm going to use has a plastic keeper. So that's after you put the plastic on, it's going to hold it. I absolutely love War Eagle spinnerbaits, but you can see like on this one, there's no soft plastic keeper. That's weight back there, and it's got a small hook. So you couldn't use something like that. Well, for me, it is really hard to beat just a regular old fluke. Yes, a fluke on the back of this, very natural. A lot of people will throw a paddle tail on it, but you have to have a smaller paddle tail that doesn't have a lot of big flopping action, because your blades are going to put vibration back here. Your trailer's going to be working against it. It just doesn't work. Your spinnerbait will want to turn off center, keel over to the side. So you might be bringing your spinnerbait in like this and notice that it's messed up. And this is a free bonus tip. Heck, I'm not even going to cover this one, but making sure your spinnerbait stays running true, you'll take your spinnerbait like this and look at it straight on and make sure this top wire is bent in line with your hook. So when I look down the center of this, I want to make sure that wire is completely straight on with the hook point back there. If this gets bent off to one side or the other, your spinnerbait's going to kick off to one side or the other. So that's a free tip. But anyway, going with a plastic that doesn't have a lot going on back here. Back in the old days, Dad and I used to throw like a ribbon tail worm on, a little one. Doesn't have too much commotion. You know, something like a thin, small, you know, one of the smaller Kitex, something like that. Find what you like. They have a number of just straight tail plastics now, but usually for me, it's going to be just a regular old fluke. And like I said, when you pop that and kick this skirt, the fluke's back there going and the skirt's popping. Oof. For me, the fourth tip is going to be, how do I work a spinnerbait? You just cast it out and reel it, right? Well, with the spinnerbait, I urge people to get out of that zombie mode. So what I mean is they cast it out there and they're just doing this with their spinnerbait. Now you can catch fish like that, but chances are it's boring. What I advise is putting some action into your spinnerbait. So as you bring it over those logs, you feel that log and kind of pop it over it, speed it up real quick after you come over it, or you feel it hit that log and come over it, let it flutter down for just a second before you start reeling it. As you're reeling it in, put twitches into it. Like I was talking about, making that skirt flare. The skirt's just going to be back like this if you're straight reeling the whole time, right? But if you're reeling it and you start popping your rod tip like you're swimming a swim jig, you know, the shake to it, you're popping that spinnerbait, the blades are going to flutter, give off flash, your skirt's going to kick back there. So I'll be reeling it and just do a boom, 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 boom. Just real quick little pops to it. Now, as I said, the stopping and going. So you can also work with your cadence. So you might be going just a regular reeling and then a couple quick turns, reeling, reeling, couple quick turns, reeling. Especially if you notice you cast it out and almost when you get it to the bank, you're like, oh, that spot over there looks good, and you start burning it up to you. You have them blow up right at your feet. Good sign for that. They probably wanted some sort of cadence to be able to react to it. I mean, who knows how far that bass could have been falling on it for, 30, 40 feet right behind it, tracking it. So mess with your cadence, give it action to it to try to get that reaction strike. Stalling too, instead of going fast, you can be reeling it and pause it, kind of flutters down and then it goes again, right? Going here, almost kind of yo-yoing it, but don't be afraid to put some sort of action into it. Okay, the fifth and final tip, a question that I get asked a ton. I love gear. Y'all know I'm a gear nerd. Do I have to get a special setup for throwing a spinnerbait? My answer is 9 times out of 10 usually no. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Unless you want to go to a smaller spinnerbait, like a 1/4 ounce kind of finesse spinnerbait, I don't throw those a ton. Usually it's 3/8 and up for me, but a 610, I like to go a little bit shorter on the spinnerbait, especially if you're in a bank, situation where you've got trees and taller grass on each side. 610 to maybe 7.2. 7 foot's kind of that sweet spot. So this is one of the new Ugly Stick carbons, but it's just a 7-foot, medium heavy, fast action rod. Now, generally, most of the time, I'm just going to go with 15-pound fluorocarbon on here. I don't even have this rigged up yet. It's one of the Abu Garcia baitcasters. 15-pound fluorocarbon on here, a 7-foot medium heavy, and go to work. Now, if you want just a little bit more stretch in it, you could certainly go to monofilament. Mono is good and strong. I use the Trilane XL. You go with I think it goes in 14 and then 16 or 17. So you can even bump it up a little bit, if you're in heavier stuff. Same with the fluorocarbon too. If I go to heavier stuff, I'll bump up to 17, and I've even thrown it on 20-pound when it's in really crazy stuff. But usually 17 is kind of that sweet spot for the thick stuff. I personally don't throw a spinnerbait on braid, so that's the only thing I don't like. I feel like it's too direct of a connection to it, I guess. So I like to have just a little bit of soft tip to it, or a little bit of stretch in the line. And what I mean is, as I'm reeling it and that bass will come up behind it, when you get a real good bite from a larger fish, you'll feel the thump of the spinnerbait, bum, 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 and then you just kind of feel this almost like toilet flush on it, and it just dies. But you're still kind of reeling in and it feels heavy. You've got a fish. I just set into him. It's not like a jig hook set. I'm not, really reeling down and whopping into him. But as soon as I feel that and I kind of start reeling down on tension, I just pull to the side, or pull up and start reeling them in. The biggest thing is make sure you keep them turned away from wherever that cover or, wood structure is where they can break you off. Try to keep them away from that. So again, I'm going to explain that. The reason I don't like braid on something like this when you're throwing it around now, guys in Florida or, gals in Florida, California, where you're fishing, the Delta type stuff or Okeechobee around a ton of grass and cover, I get why you would use braid, right? Makes sense. But for me, most of the time around here in the Midwest, fishing smaller lakes, smaller ponds and stuff, when a bass comes up and bites it, you've only got that one hook here and there's quite a bit of stuff going on. You've got flash up here, you've got skirt moving, you may or may not have a plastic back here. So oftentimes when they come up and they'll just kind of swipe and grab it, I don't want to pull it away right away. I want to make sure I've got a fish. So if you've got a mono or you've got a decently soft, like moderate fast or fast rod, that rod will usually start to bend and load a little bit before you actually really get to that fish. That's when I set the hook. So hopefully that makes sense. Some of that will just kind of come with time and playing, but I don't go to a heavy or extra heavy, if you're around wood, kind of like the way you would flipping and pitching. Because I'm usually fishing the spinnerbait, within a couple feet of the top of the water. So a medium heavy 7-foot with your regular size bait caster on there, 100, 150 size. You don't need to bump up to a 200 with more line capacity usually because it's mostly kind of target casting. So hopefully that helps with the combo. I get a lot of questions on that. All right, folks, do me a favor, comment below and let me know what is the biggest tip that you have used or learned that has helped you catch more fish from the bank with a spinnerbait. Again, I gave you my 5 tips. I even kind of gave you some extras in there. Hopefully it helps because I love spinnerbait fishing, especially now. It seems like so many people, even including myself in a lot of situations, are throwing a chatterbait instead of places where they would have thrown a spinnerbait. So I think it's, kind of cyclical. A lot of stuff in bass fishing is, it was cool 10 years ago, then it dies off, and it comes back. I think the spinnerbait's kind of there. Everybody and their great uncle Herman is throwing chatterbaits. Be different and try the old spinnerbait. So that's it for me. Again, my name is Devin from Debo's Fishing, coming to you on the Monster Bass channel. Thank you all for watching, and until next time.